Okay, part 6, going over Jewish people and my encyclopedias from the 1890s. If you're new here, my name's Sandra. I love old books. If you're upset about this, I do not give a shit. You can block me. You don't have to be here. Don't leave your stupid comments. Just don't. Here and there, they possessed the rights of citizens or were allowed to hold real estate. In general, they were permitted to prosecute only commerce and usury, and the law turned on them the harshest aspect. Repeatedly, too, the emperors gratified at once their piety and their greed by canceling their pecuniary claims. In many places, they were compelled to live in certain parts of the town known as the Judenstrasse or Jews Street, which is where the word ghetto comes from. Switzerland commenced to persecute them about the middle of the 14th century. In the 15th century, they were expelled from various places. You don't fucking say. I would have never guessed. Their treatment was more humane in Poland and Lithuania, and after 1348, their numbers there were swelling by fugitives from Germany and Switzerland. Russia and Hungary received, persecuted, and banished them. In Spain, the condition of the Jews was long highly favorable, but the horrible persecutions by the Gothic princes in the 6th and 7th century made it inevitable that the first gleam of a Moorish scimitar on the coast would turn them into allies of the invaders. During the whole of the brilliant period of Moorish rule in the peninsula, they enjoyed indeed what must have seemed to them, in comparison with their fate elsewhere, a sort of Elysian life. They were almost on terms of equality with their Mohammedan masters, rivaled them in civilization and letters, and probably surpassed them in wealth. The Spanish Jews were consequently of the much higher type than their brethren in other parts of Europe. They were not reduced to the one degraded occupation of usury, though they followed that too. On the contrary, they were husbandmen, landed proprietaries, physicians, financial administrators, and they had courts of justice for themselves. The Christian monarchs of the north and center also came to appreciate the value of their services, and we find them for a time protected and encouraged by the rulers of Aragon and Castile. But the extravagance of the nobles and the increasing power of the priesthood ultimately brought about a disastrous change. The estates of the nobles were in many cases mortgaged to the Jews. Hence, it was not difficult for conscience to get up a persecution. Gradually, the Jews were deprived of the privilege of living where they pleased. Their rights were diminished and their taxes augmented. In Seville, Cordova, Toledo, Valencia, Catalonia, and the island of Majorca, outbursts of priestly and popular violence took place. 1391 and 92. Immense numbers were murdered and wholesale theft was perpetrated by the religious rabble. Escape was possible only by flight to Africa or by accepting baptism at the point of the sword. The number of these enforced converts to Christianity is reckoned at 200,000. The fate of the Jews in Spain during the 15th century, however, beggars description. We read of nothing but persecution, violent conversion, massacre, and tortures of the Inquisition. Thousands were burned alive, and in 1 year, 280 were burned in Seville alone. Sometimes the popes and even the nobles shuddered at the finished zeal of the inquisitors and tried to mitigate it, but in vain. I think it's odd that it said the only way to escape would be a flight to Africa, because this set of encyclopedias is from the 1890s and you couldn't fly to Africa. So I'm wondering what they meant. At length, the hour of final horror came. In 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella issued an edict for the expulsion within 4 months of all who refused to become Christians, with the strict prohibition to take neither gold nor silver out of the country. The Jews offered an enormous sum for its revocation, and for a moment the sovereigns hesitated, but when Torquemada, the Dominican Inquisitor General, compared them to Judas, they shrank from the awful accusation, and the ruin of the most industrious and most thriving, the most peaceable and the most learned of their subjects, and consequently of Spain herself, became irredeemable. Not less than 300,000 resolved to abandon the country, which a residence of 7 centuries had made almost a second Judea to them. The incidents that marked their departure are heartrending. Almost every land was shut against them. Some, however, ventured into France, others into Italy, Turkey, or Morocco, in the last of which countries they suffered the most frightful privations. Of the 80,000 who obtained an entrance into Portugal for 8 months on payment of 8 gold pennies a head, many lingered after the expiry of the appointed time, and the poorer were sold as slaves. In 1495, King Emmanuel commanded them to quit his territories, but at the same time issued a secret order that all Jewish children under 14 years of age should be torn from their mothers, retained in Portugal, and brought up as Christians. Agony drove the Jewish mothers into madness. They destroyed their children with their own hands and threw them into wells and rivers to prevent their persecutors. Holy fucking shit. Dude, these people are fucking demon, monster, evil devils. What the fuck? The miseries of those who embraced Christianity, but who for the most part secretly adhered to their old faith, anusim, yielding to violence, forced ones, were hardly less dreadful, and it was far on in the 17th century before persecution ceased. Audis da Fé of suspected converts happened as late as 1655. The wanderers appeared to have met with much better treatment in Italy and Turkey than anywhere else. During the 15th and 16th centuries, they are to be found in almost every city in Italy, pursuing various kinds of traffic. Near the whole trade of the Levant, for instance, was in their hands, but chiefly engaged in money lending, in which they rivaled the great Lombard bankers. Abarbanel, perhaps the most eminent Jewish scholar and divine of his days, rose to be confidential advisor to the king of Naples. In Turkey, they were held in higher estimation than the conquered Greeks. They were allowed to reopen their schools, to establish synagogues, and to settle in all the commercial towns of the Levant. The invention of printing, the revival of learning, and the Reformation are generally asserted to have been beneficial to the Jews, but this is only partially true. When the Jews began to use the press at their earliest stage for their own literature, sacred and otherwise, the Emperor Maximilian was urged, chiefly by converts, to order all Hebrew writings to be committed to the flames. I don't blame him. And, but for the strenuous exertions of Reuchlin, ignorance, treachery, and bigotry might have secured a despicable triumph. Luther, in the earlier part of his career, looked with no favorable eye on the adoption of violent means for their conversion. On the other hand, Pope Sixtus V was animated by a far more wise, kindly spirit towards them than the Protestant prince of the time. In 1588, he abolished all the persecution statuses of his predecessors, allowed them to settle and trade in every city of his dominions, and enjoy the free exercise of their religion, and in respect to the administration of justice and taxation, placed them on a footing of equality with the rest of his subjects. That the Reformation itself had nothing to do with subsequent ameliorations in the condition of the Jews is only too plain from the fact that in many parts of Germany, Protestant as well as Catholic, their lot became actually harder than before. They were driven out of Bavaria, 1553, out of the Brandenburg, 1573, and during the whole of the 17th and the first part of the 18th century, the hardships inflicted on them by the German governments positively became more and more grievous. What really caused the change in their favor was the great uprising of the human reason that marked the middle of the 18th century. Among the writers who distinguished themselves in Germany by pleading the cause of the Jews, we may specially mention Lessing and Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn, I've talked about them. They said they were Quakers, but really they were Jews. In Holland, the Jews were permitted as early as 1603 to settle and trade, though they did not acquire the right of citizenship till 1796. Come back for part 7.